The clash, the turmoil of Western civilization, other roots of that are in the diverse origins. When I looked at the origins of China, there is one origin, which is ancient China, and then the Qing Emperor, and so on.
Mm.
Same in Japan. Many civilizations have one source, and then everything flows from it. Europe has two, as Guizot and other great historians have pointed out, and that is Roman and Germanic. So after the Greeks, you had these two civilizations crashing together. And so many of the ideas, I mean, Rome was conquered by the Germans, but they didn't get rid of Roman civilization. So it coexisted and then flourished again later. So there's always been a yin yang tension
Mm.
in China, as Guizot points out, in Europe. And you could even suggest that things like fascism and so on are the re-emergence of Roman centralized authoritarian legal and political systems. So there's this tension, Rome against Germany. And it's the one that, um, for example, Ruskin highlights in his Stones of Venice in the art systems between the Gothic and the
Yeah.
Roman art system. So you get a tension between the art systems, the poetry, the law, and that's never quite resolved, and it's still going on now. You could even see Brexit as another example of it. Now, um, and to add to that sort of tension and contradiction, you have within Europe several very different ethnic origins, particularly the split between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. I mean, long ago I was amazed in the work of a demographer, John Haynal, who showed that there were two marriage systems in Europe. There was the one, he drew a line between Trieste in northern Italy and a Russian city, say Leningrad. And west of that, people married late and selectively. East of it, they married young and everyone married. A totally different marriage systems. Well, that later, people like Emmanuel Todd and others have shown applies to almost everything, from family systems to religious systems, obviously to the languages, which are more Hungarian and Slavic on one side, social structures, organization of villages, political systems. So east and west of that line, you're basically in two different worlds.
And this is something that Gellner picks up, doesn't it? Because I mean, his argument for when he's talking about nationalism, and he's talking about how um, societies centralize around the idea of a nation. It's more difficult east of that line than it is west of it.
Absolutely, because I mean, it's totally different political origins. Um, Basically, it reflects the long history of invasions of Europe because the nomadic peoples of Central Asia, the Huns and the Slavs and so on and so on, got a certain distance and then they were stopped. And at that point, um, one civilization stopped and another one started. Now, because of that, everything is different, as you say, the political difficulties. I mean, on the Western side, you have an old tradition of nations of a kind
Mm.
from medieval times onwards, but um, in the East, you didn't have even the concept of a nation or anything like it. So that difference, which is concealed to most people, I mean, you don't see it, but if you know about it and then start looking at, field patterns, housing patterns, um, and everything, you will find. And of course, Ernest was particularly well placed to be aware of the difference because he came from the eastern side and then
Yeah.
grew up in the western side. And it's the sort of civilizational difference which great historians like Mark Bloch, who drew another line between northern France and northern Germany, the Mark Bloch line, which is Germanic, mainly Germanic with some Roman, and the south, which is Roman with some Germanic. And he found the field shapes and the social structures and everything differed. It's a really important invisible line. So in a sense, Europe is cut into four pieces: northern, southern, eastern, western. And the troubles that the European market is having now with Hungary and all this sort of stuff, it's not surprising how different.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, this, isn't it? And I think worth you bringing it to light, because when we think about, say, Africa and the way that the colonial powers carved it all up, we've got used to the idea that these were artificial boundaries that made a mess of all sorts of the agriculture, the different systems and all that kind of thing. But we don't tend to do it to ourselves. We don't tend to do it to Europe. But actually, as you're saying, it's just as relevant, and we ought to be looking at this a little bit harder than we are doing if we're going to try and get out of the mess that we're in, or understand the mess anyway.
Well, absolutely. And I haven't been into it, but the Balkan Wars are probably very much a reflection of these much deeper roots between Islamic influence, Serbian, Slavic, Hungarian sort of civilizations. That whole area in sort of Central Europe is a contested ground for all these different things. Once you get, to Western France, you're fairly secure in one, and we've always lived securely in one, but much of Europe is still caught in that difference.